Olds at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, standing in a parking lot in the rain, and Nora said yes before I even finished the sentence. That was the problem. I'm Adrian Cole. I'm 32. I teach high school history at a public school in Portland. And until that night, Nora Vance was primarily known in my life as the woman in the apartment across the hall who had strong opinions about everything I did wrong. And I mean everything. The way I stacked recycling, the hour I came home, the specific brand of protein bar I left on the shared mail table once by mistake, which she returned with a post-it that said, "This isn't a pantry, Cole. We met 11 months before the parking lot because of a smoke alarm. Not mine, hers." It was a Sunday in October, 7 in the morning, and the alarm in 3A started screaming. I came out in a sweatshirt and socks, half asleep, and found Nora standing in the hallway in a robe with a dish towel, fanning smoke away from her door. I had it under control. Do you need? The alarm is still going. I had it under control. She was 28. Short dark hair that she kept pinned up most of the time, with pieces always falling loose, like they'd staged a quiet revolt. Worked as a physical therapist at a sports medicine clinic downtown, which I only knew because I saw her leave in scrubs 3 days a week, and once heard her on the phone talking about someone's ACL with the calm authority of someone who had personally designed the human knee. She did not smile at me that morning. She fanned the smoke. The alarm stopped. She looked at me like I had caused the alarm personally, then went back inside without a word. After that, we developed a rhythm of minor conflict. She left a note on my door the first month because my shower, apparently, ran loud enough at 6 a.m. to rattle the pipes into her wall. I left a note on her door because her wind chimes on the shared balcony were less relaxing than she seemed to believe. She complained that I parked slightly over the line in the garage. I mentioned once, diplomatically, that her habit of signing for both our packages and then leaving mine outside her door like a border checkpoint was not technically helpful. She was not warm. She was not friendly. She communicated with the precision of someone accustomed to explaining which movements would cause more damage, and applied that same energy to everything, including me. Here's what I told myself. I found her exhausting. That was the story. The one I wasn't examining, was that I had started coming home from work slightly slower when I knew she was usually around. That I had opinions ready. That a day where I ran into Nora in the hall and she said something cutting was a better day than one where I didn't see her at all. I didn't sit with that. I let it live in my peripheral vision where it couldn't cause problems. The night everything shifted started with her car, a 10-year-old Subaru that she maintained with dedication. She had a mechanic she trusted, a place near the clinic that she'd mentioned exactly once in passing as one of those rare things in life that was reliable. But reliability has limits. Raining all day, the unserious Portland drizzle that becomes serious around 9 p.m. And when I pulled into the garage after a department meeting that had run 40 minutes too long, I found Nora standing next to her car with a flashlight app pointed at her left rear tire. Flat. I said, "You need help?" She said, "I have a spare." "Okay, I know how to change a tire." I didn't say you didn't. She looked at me, then at the tire, then back at me. "The lug nuts are stripped. I can't get traction." I set my bag down. It took us 40 minutes in the garage to confirm that the spare tire situation was worse than the original situation, that the jack that came with the car was technically functional but practically miserable, and that neither of us had the right tool for stripped lug nuts at 10 o'clock on a weeknight in the rain. I called a roadside assistance line. They said an hour minimum. With her arms crossed, phone in her pocket, rain audible on the garage roof. "You can go upstairs," she said. "I'm not going upstairs. You don't have to wait." "I know." She looked at me. I couldn't read the look. She turned back to the car. We waited. At some point, she sat on the concrete divider near the wall, and I leaned against my car across from her. She had a jacket on that wasn't quite enough for the cold, and she wasn't going to say so. "Want my jacket?" "No." "Okay, pause. I have one in my car?" "Cole, it's not a gift, Nora. It's 43 degrees. She didn't answer for a second. Then, "Fine." I handed her the jacket. She put it on without looking at me. For a while, we talked about nothing. The building's new elevator inspection notice. The Thai place on Morrison that had apparently closed without warning, safe things. The kind of conversation that fills space without requiring anything from either person. Phone lit up with a notification and something crossed her face before she locked the screen. I waited. She said, "Today would have been my dad's 61st birthday." The garage went quieter, somehow. "He died 4 years ago," she said. "Heart attack. Completely out of nowhere. 72 hours from first symptom to gone." She said it without inflection. The way you say things you've had to say enough times that the words don't carry the same weight anymore, but the weight still exists somewhere else in your body. I kept thinking about calling him today. I do that sometimes still. I'll be doing something normal and I'll think, Dad would have an opinion about this. And then I remember, I didn't say he'd want you to be happy. All that sentence applied to grief before, and I understood that it was meant kindly and functioned like a door closing. What would he have had an opinion about? I asked. She blinked. Like the question surprised her. My tire, she said, and almost smiled. He taught me to change a tire in a grocery store parking lot when I was 16. Old. He would have had opinions about these lug nuts, specifically. Critical opinions? He would have blamed the previous owner. Reasonable. She looked down at her hands. He was a contractor. Worked with his hands his whole life. He could not understand why I became a physical therapist instead of something more practical. A pause. That was a joke. He came to every single one of my clinical hours. He brought coffee for everyone. The roadside truck showed up 40 minutes later. The technician had the right tool. The whole thing was resolved in 8 minutes, which felt offensive given the wait. Nora stood up, thanked the technician, then stood beside her now functional car, looking the way people look after a crisis has passed and the adrenaline is leaving. You okay? I asked. I'm fine, Nora. She met my eyes, then she said quietly, it's just a bad day to have a flat tire. That was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. I should have left it there, both standing in the parking lot in the cold, and the sensible thing was to go upstairs and let the night end. Instead, I said, without planning to, come get a drink, not a bar, my kitchen. I have whiskey and I have very low standards for Tuesday night conversation. Nora stared at me. I realized immediately how it sounded and lifted one hand. Or not. Well, it was just, you've been standing in a parking lot for an hour and it's your dad's birthday. She was quiet for long enough that I started mentally composing a normal recovery statement. Then she said, okay, not after a pause, not reluctantly, just okay. Like it had been sitting there already. She handed me back my jacket and walked toward the elevator, and I stood there for 2 seconds before following, because something in her voice when she said okay had told me the word had been ready for a while. My apartment was not designed to impress. I had moved in 2 years earlier. After ending a long relationship that had lasted past the point where either of us was being honest, and I'd furnished it the way a person furnishes a place when they're not sure they're staying. Decent couch, bookshelves assembled badly and corrected over time. A kitchen that was functional if you didn't look in the back of the cabinet where I kept things that should have been thrown away. Nora stood inside the door and looked at it the way she looked at everything, assessing. You have a lot of books for a history teacher, she said. That's not the insult you think it is. It wasn't an insult. All observation. Your observations tend to function as insults. Your sensitivity tends to function as ego. She looked at the shelf nearest the door. Are these organized? By era, then region. She picked up a book about the labor movement in the Pacific Northwest, looked at the spine, put it back. You read this for fun? I teach it. I know. I asked if you read it for fun. Yes. She looked at me like that was unexpected information she was filing somewhere. Oral. Then she sat down on my couch, like she'd been asked to wait in a room and wasn't sure how long she'd be staying. I poured 2 glasses of whiskey, a decent bottle I'd bought for a dinner party in March that never happened, and set one in front of her. She picked it up and looked at it instead of drinking it. I sat down at the other end of the couch. He would have hated this whiskey, she said. He was a bourbon man, very specific about it. 20 minutes in the liquor store comparing labels and then always buy the same one. What was it? Maker's Mark, every time. He did the research so he could feel justified arriving at the conclusion he already had. Principled, stubborn. She turned the glass. I'm the same way. I just do it faster. I know. She looked at me sideways. You could have said something nicer. I could have. That got a real sound out of her. Not quite a laugh. Something smaller, but genuine. She drank. After a while, the conversation moved somewhere it hadn't been before. She told me about her dad. Not the grief version, the person version. How he'd grown up in Cincinnati and moved to Oregon in his 30s, chasing a construction contract and never left. How he'd coached her soccer team badly and with total commitment. All the last real conversation she'd had with him was about whether she was happy, and she'd said yes, and she'd meant it. And then 72 hours later, she was standing in a hospital corridor being told the information that cleaved her life into a before and after. I came back to work too fast, she said. 14 days. Everyone told me to take longer, and I didn't because if I stopped moving, I didn't know what I'd do when I stopped. She said it to the glass, not to me. Why the notes, I said. She looked up, the post-its, the complaints, the line in the garage. She didn't answer right away. Then, I argued with you because it was manageable. You'd push back. You weren't careful with me. She picked at the edge of her sleeve. After my dad, everyone got careful. My mom cried every time I mentioned him. My coworkers lowered their voices like the whole building was a funeral. Well, stopped things that were hard because they didn't want to add to my load. She looked at me. You told me my wind chimes were annoying. They were. They were, she said. But that's the point. You didn't look at me like I was a problem to be handled. I felt something move in my chest, quiet and seismic at the same time. I left the jacket note, she said, because your shower was loud. Also because I needed something to be someone else's fault for 5 minutes. I know. She turned and looked at me. You knew? I suspected. Her jaw worked slightly. You could have said what I have said? I don't know. Something. You wouldn't have accepted it. She held my gaze for a second, then looked down. No, probably not. The apartment was quiet. Not uncomfortable. A particular kind of quiet that builds between two people after something true has been said, and neither of them is trying to unsay it. She set her glass on the coffee table. I say okay too fast, she said, in the parking lot. I know how it sounded. How do you think it sounded? Like I'd been waiting for someone to not make me be fine. For one night. That sentence landed in the room and stayed. That's not something to apologize for, I said. She looked up. All were bright in a way she was clearly not happy about. It is when the person is the man across the hall that I've been leaving complaint notes for since November. Honestly, that makes it more interesting. She pressed her lips together, looked away. Cole? Nora? I'm not. She stopped. Started again. I don't do this well, getting close to people. After my dad, it got worse. I started assuming people would leave before I let them stay, so I made it easier for them to go. I took a breath. I know. You don't know. I've watched you make it easier for people to go for almost a year. She went still. You're very good at it, I said. Efficient. Precise. You give people just enough friction that they decide it's not worth it, and you get to be right that they were going to leave anyway. She was staring at me. That's a hard thing to say, she said, quietly. Oh, most people wouldn't. I know that too. Her eyes were wet now. She didn't look away, which cost her something. What if I do it to you, she said. What if I make you decide it's not worth it? Then I'll be annoying about the recycling until you stop. Something broke open in her face. She laughed once, real and a little ragged, and then covered her mouth with her hand. Her eyes spilled over. I didn't move toward her dramatically. I just slid slightly closer on the couch. Nora, I said. You can be here tonight because it's your dad's birthday, and your tire was stripped, and sometimes a day is just too heavy to carry into an empty apartment. You don't have to make it mean something it can't mean yet. She lowered her hand. Her voice was unsteady. And if part of it is you? There it was. I picked my next words the way you pick something fragile off a shelf. Oh, we don't rush that while you've got flat tire grease on your jacket and you're grieving at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. She stared at me. Her mouth did something complicated. That is a very reasonable answer, she said. I'm deeply unhappy about it. That made her laugh again, broken and quiet. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, which she immediately looked embarrassed about. I got up and grabbed a glass of water from the kitchen and set it in front of her without ceremony. Hold it without comment. We sat there for another hour. She talked about her dad more, the bad stories, the embarrassing ones, the ones that were funny now, how he'd once spent an entire Thanksgiving trying to fix a garbage disposal and finally admitted defeat at 9 p.m. and ordered pizza, and everyone agreed it was the best Thanksgiving. How he'd kept a jar of change on his workshop shelf his whole life, and when Nora asked him what it was for, he said he didn't know. It just seemed right to have one. I have his jar, she said, on my kitchen windowsill. I didn't say anything. Sometimes the right response is just staying in the room. Around midnight, she stood up slowly. I should go. Okay. She picked up her jacket, paused at the door. Adrian. It was the first time she'd used my first name. Not Cole. Adrian. Oh, I said. She looked at the jar on my kitchen counter. I had one too. Coffee money I never remembered to use. Then back at me. I made up reasons to complain about you. I know. I didn't want to admit I looked forward to it. I stayed where I was. I know that too. Her hand was on the door. She looked terrified and completely still. I don't know how to do this without it being difficult, she said. I'm not expecting easy. I'll try to leave before I have to admit I want to stay. I'll make noise in the shower so you know I'm still there. She laughed once, sharp and startled. Then her face went softer than I'd ever seen it. She opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Paused, looked back. The whiskey was fine, she said. Don't tell anyone I said that. Good night, Nora. She went across the hall. I heard her door close. I stood in my kitchen for a while, all about anything efficiently. The next 2 weeks were careful in the way you're careful around something you don't want to scare off. We talked in the hall when we ran into each other. She brought back my jacket with a note that said returned. No further obligations, which was her version of a peace offering. I left coffee from the good place on Morrison next to her mat one morning without announcing it, and she didn't mention it, but I noticed the cup was gone within 10 minutes. Oh, it was a different kind of arguing, less walls, more sparring. The difference between two people throwing things at each other and two people playing catch badly. 3 weeks after the parking lot, her clinic had a patient who'd had a bad session outcome. Nothing catastrophic, but the kind of thing that sits in your chest for days. And she knocked on my door at 8:30 on a Thursday. I opened it. She didn't say anything for a second. Do you still have the whiskey? She said. No. What bourbon? She looked at me. Maker's Mark, I said. It's a defensible choice. Something moved across her face that I was learning to recognize, the precise moment when Nora decided something cost less than she'd expected. She came inside. That was how it started. Not with a declaration, not with a perfect moment in the rain. Polski and a parking lot and a woman who had spent years making herself smaller and harder to reach, figuring out one Tuesday that I wasn't planning to leave just because she made it easy. 4 months after the parking lot, I met her mother. This was not planned. Her mother drove up from Salem to visit and ran into me in the lobby by accident, and Nora, to her visible distress, had to introduce us. A small woman with Nora's coloring and the kind of eyes that record everything without showing the footage. She shook my hand, looked at me, looked at Nora. This is Adrian, Nora said. He lives across the hall. Pause. And? Her mother said. Nora's jaw tightened, and he's my friend. Her mother nodded slowly. She looked at me with the specific expression of a woman who has watched her daughter build walls for 4 years and is calculating how high this one goes. Later in the kitchen, while Nora was on a call in the other room, her mother handed me a dish to dry and said simply, she doesn't let people stay. I noticed, I said. She got that from her father. Once she decides someone is important, she doesn't say it. She just makes it inconvenient for them to leave and hopes they figure it out. I looked at her. Is that a warning? It's context, she said. The warning is, don't give up on her when she gets scared. She'll act like she wants you to. Well, doesn't. That was the whole conversation, but I kept it. The first time Nora told me she loved me, she said it sideways. We were driving back from a camping trip in the gorge in October. Her idea, which had surprised me, because Nora's idea of roughing it was a hotel with slow room service. It had rained one of the 2 nights, which she'd been deeply irritated about, and we'd ended up sharing a sleeping bag and talking for 3 hours about nothing important in the dark. On the drive back, she was quiet most of the way. Then, about 20 minutes from home, she said, you know what I told my mom about this trip? What? I said I was going with a friend. You still do that, I know. She looked out the window. She said, quote, you use the word friend the way other people use the word love, and one day you're going to have to pick one. I kept my eyes on the road. Nora said, she's not wrong. Silence. Quietly. I'm picking. I reached across the console and found her hand without looking. She let me hold it the rest of the way home. 6 months later, she gave me a key to her apartment because she was traveling for a PT conference and needed someone to water her plants. When she came back, she didn't ask for the key back. I didn't bring it up. She said nothing for 2 weeks. Then one morning I was leaving for work and she stopped me in the hallway and said, you can keep it, okay. That's all I'm saying. Okay. She looked like she wanted to say more. Decided against it. Turned toward her door. Nora. She paused. I know what the key means. She nodded once, her back still to me, and went inside. That was the language we'd learned. The one that lived just under the direct statement, in the kept key and the maker's mark and the jar of change, and the knocking on the door at 8:30 when a day was too heavy. Worked. A year and a half after the parking lot, I proposed on a Sunday morning in her kitchen while she was making coffee. Not romantic by most definitions, no reservation, no ring box balanced on a dessert, no coordinated moment. Just me and Nora, and a Sunday that felt like all the other Sundays we'd spent across the hall from each other, except that now we'd stopped pretending we weren't building something. I had the ring in my jacket pocket. Well, I'd had it there for 3 weeks, waiting for the moment that felt like her, not like a proposal in a movie. She was measuring out coffee with the seriousness she applied to everything, and I said, I want to do this for a long time. She looked up. Coffee? Sundays with you. She set the measuring spoon down, slowly. That's vague, she said. But her voice had changed. Nora Vance, I said. I fell in love with you in a parking lot in the rain over stripped lug nuts. Argue about recycling with you for the rest of my life. I want to be the person you knock on the door for at 8:30. She was very still. I put the ring on the counter between us. She looked at it for a long moment, then at me. Her eyes were doing the thing she hated, filling up before she could stop it. You have terrible timing, she said. I have excellent timing. I'm in my pajamas. I've seen your pajamas. She looked at the ring again. Her hand covered her mouth briefly. Then she lowered it. If I say yes, she said carefully, I'm going to need you to understand that I will still be difficult. I'm counting on it. I will still try to leave before I admit I want to stay. I'll still leave the light on. She picked up the ring, held it, set it back down. Yes, she said. Not dramatically, not in a speech. Just yes, like the word had been patient. We got married the following September at a small winery outside Portland. Cried twice and tried to hide it both times. Nora's college roommate gave a toast that mentioned the lug nuts, which Nora had apparently told multiple people. Her father wasn't there. That was the absence that sat beside us at the table, quiet and present and ours to carry. But her mom brought a jar of change that she put on the gift table without explanation. Nora saw it and didn't say anything, just stood next to it for a moment, then went back to the room. That was enough. Years later, when people ask how we got together, I usually say, flat tire in a parking lot. Nora says stripped lug nuts. I say that's not the romantic version. She says it's the honest one. She's right. The truth is, I didn't fall in love with Nora when she stopped being difficult. In love because she trusted me enough to let me see why she was, and stayed anyway. Not because the emergency forced her to, but because some part of her had decided quietly and without ceremony that I was worth the risk of staying for. And if you've ever had someone in your life who argues with you like it's personal but shows up when it counts, tell me. I want to know if you figured it out before the parking lot or after. Leave it in the comments. If this one meant something to you, leave a like, and I'll see you in the next one.